That's right. Today we are talking about depression as much more than sadness. Depression is more than sadness. Sadness is normal. Depression is a problem. As we talk about that, it's important to understand that sadness is an emotion. Depression is a diagnosis that's causing a problem. As parents, so many times it's hard to not want to run in and fix when your child is feeling even sad. But sadness is not a problem. Sadness is an emotion that is completely normal, completely acceptable, completely manageable, and as a matter of fact, and you'll learn in the next season of Mister Stu TV, that sadness serves a really great purpose as well. It can help you understand what it is you care about and can show others the different things that you care about, whereas depression causes problems. Depression is more than sadness. Sadness is normal. Depression is a problem. And that's important to keep in mind because when children come into my office, so many times their parent will say they've been feeling very sad lately. And while that can be a sign of deeper things going on, sadness is not a behavior or an emotion that I treat as a therapist, but depression is something that I would treat as a therapist. Depression is more than sadness. Sadness is normal. Depression is a problem. Let's just talk quickly about what depression really is. I've told you what it is not. It is not just sadness. It's more than sadness. Whereas sadness is normal and depression is a problem, it's important to understand that depression isn't an emotion. Now, again, you can feel depressed, but depression, the diagnosis of depression, is about more than sadness. It's about the brain being depressed. What I mean by that is it's the brain moving slower, not the person feeling sadder. Those two things don't always go hand in hand. I'll talk in just a moment about different signs and symptoms of depression, but depression is the brain moving slower, not the person feeling sadder. You can feel more sad because of the things that you're missing out on, but sadness in and of itself is not the problem. Sadness would be a symptom of depression, but not the overall disorder of depression. It's not as if the only thing that people with depression are feeling is sadness. They are feeling so many more things because their brain is not firing as fast as it's supposed to. Their brain is depressed. Their brain is quickly overwhelmed by different things. And that is the problem. That's the thing that needs to be undone. Whereas sadness is completely normal, completely okay to feel. Depression causes everything else to not function the way that it's supposed to function. And it's important to understand how this presents in young children because so many times people don't even think that young children can have depression. They think that children are just acting out or that they're just lazy or that they're antisocial or whatever it might be. But if you look at the symptoms and you put it all together, you can see how much stress is being caused to the person who's facing depression. Let's talk about the symptoms of depression. There are different categories of the symptoms. There are physical symptoms, things that are actually happening in the brain and in the body. There are emotional symptoms, those symptoms that affect your different emotional states, your feelings. And then there are behavioral symptoms, those symptoms that can actually be observed, those things that you can watch and see that those behaviors are disruptive. As we talk about physical symptoms, some examples of this are fatigue, quickly feeling out of energy, or just tired. Let's go back to again that depression is more than sadness. If your brain is just kind of always grinding, if it's always being pushed down, so every single thing is so difficult, then you are going to get fatigued much faster than someone who is not dealing with that because their brain is flowing freely, whereas yours is having a lot of difficulty even doing the smallest things. So you can get quickly tired. There may be some changes in either appetite or weight. Let's talk about appetite first. The brain is involved in digestion. The brain has a lot to do to tell the body to do as it's digesting different foods. If your brain is under all this pressure and all this stress to do so many different things, it's not going to want to signal to you that you also need to take in more food because that's going to be even more work for your brain. This loss of appetite is a big signal that there's something going on. If your child just starts to say, "Oh, I'm not hungry," and that's new, that's something to really think about because it could be that their brain is starting to be strained and it's just not able to fire to even say, "We need to eat more food." So there's that fatigue, there may be changes in appetite, and let's talk about changes in weight. If you're not moving as much, then it could be that that change in weight is an increase in your weight. You're eating the same amount, but you're moving less because, again, your brain isn't firing as well as it should. So you may gain weight. On the other hand, if you are someone who's experiencing the symptom of a loss of appetite, then it could be that you continue doing the same amount of things, but you're eating less, so there is a decrease in weight. In therapy, a good thing to think about is a weight change of 10 pounds or more over the last 90 days or so. And think about if that is a planned or unplanned change. Now, in children shouldn't really be going through crash diets that are causing them to gain or lose 10 pounds in that short of a period of time. So if you see a 10-pound weight change, whether that be a decrease or an increase in that child's weight, so a noticeable change in weight, you can look at the person and just see that they've either gained or lost weight in a fairly short period of time. If you notice that, then that is a symptom, that's a sign that depression might be happening in that person because they may be either eating less, they may be eating more to try to feed more of the brain to make the brain get more of this chemical called dopamine that is given when you're eating junk food. Junk food triggers dopamine, which makes you feel good in your brain. And so that's why when you're depressed, you crave those junk foods because your brain is dying for some dopamine. So if you're eating a bunch of junk food and not moving as much, it could be a weight gain. And if you are not eating as much because your brain just can't even think about digesting food, then it could be that decrease in weight. If you see those changes, it's something to think about, that there may be something deeper going on. In adults, it could be that that weight change was planned. Maybe someone is about to go on vacation, they wanted to lose a certain amount of weight. Maybe somebody's going through a more stressful time, and so they are rushing back and forth, and so they're eating more fast food, things like that. It's important to check with the person. One of those symptoms alone is not enough to diagnose depression, but these are things that in combination with one another may be showing something deeper. A lack of interest in activities is another physical symptom, something that actually is happening in the brain, in the body. And that lack of interest is, again, because the brain is not firing as well as it should. If you're not able to do things in the way that you want to be able to do them, or if you're no longer as good at certain things as you once were, you're not going to want to participate in those things as much. On the other hand, it could be that your brain is just so overwhelmed with all of the necessary daily tasks that adding some fun things might seem even overwhelming to the brain. So it could be that those things that used to be fun and exciting and something that you never thought this person or even yourself would say no to, now they're starting to say no to those things. It could be a sign of something deeper. Now, tastes also change. So it could be that your child has just outgrown that thing. If they are still participating in things that they find fun, then it's nothing to worry about or think about. But if it's something where they're not able to find anything that's fun anymore, and not just that boredom phrase of, oh, that's not fun, but really you can tell that this child is not really gaining any joy or excitement from many things, then that could be a sign of something deeper, that their brain is not firing well enough, that their brain is depressed, and so they're not able to participate in things because their brain is just getting quickly overwhelmed. Those are some of the physical symptoms of depression. Let's talk a little bit about emotional symptoms, those things that are in your feelings. It could be that the person experiences a low self-esteem or low self-worth. That, again, comes from the brain being under that pressure, being depressed, and not firing as well as it should. The person's going to think, oh, well, I can't do things how I used to, or I can't do things as well as this other person. That comparison can then diminish self-esteem, diminish self-worth, and then it's a perpetuating cycle. So the person will start to feel like they're no good, then they'll start to do fewer things, and then they'll start to feel bad about that, and then they'll start to feel worse, and that emotion can spiral and spiral. Feelings of guilt or feelings of despair. Sometimes in depression, the brain can do some strange things. And sometimes those feelings of guilt can come on because the brain is just trying to make sense of why it's feeling so bad, why it's not feeling like it can keep going. And so sometimes it will start to blame itself. It will start to blame you for different things that are going on because you are something that you can control. So rather than just bad things happening, you may start to blame yourself because your brain will say, well, maybe there's something I can do. The problem with that is that if you believe that it's about you and it's not about you, and then you go and try to change yourself and that doesn't work, then you're just going to start to believe that you're a bad person causing all of these bad things and you're going to feel guilty. Then some of those physical symptoms will pick up, and now depression is in a spiral again. Do you see how this is so much more than sadness? Irritability is an emotional symptom of depression. Many times parents will come into my therapy office and they will tell me they're just so angry, I don't know what's wrong. They just go off on me on the smallest thing, or I ask them how their day was and they just start to yell and tell me that they don't want to talk. That irritability is a symptom of depression. That irritability comes on because the brain is already feeling overwhelmed. It already has that grind going on that's not allowing it to function in the way that it's supposed to function. And so any extra thing, even if that thing seems positive, even if it's, hey, do you want to go out to eat? And the person's like, no, I don't want to go out to eat. That doesn't seem to make any sense. Why are they so irritable? Well, if you're laying there, and even just laying there is overwhelming because your brain is on that grind, then if somebody asks you to do another thing, then you become overwhelmed. That overwhelming feeling often comes out as anger. That's where the irritability comes from. In children, this can come in the form of not wanting to talk anymore. It could come in the form of arguments that seem silly, all types of different things where the brain is just saying, okay, I don't want to do anything. No, I'm already overwhelmed. Get out of here. And that can create that irritable sense in people. And then finally, there are those behavioral symptoms. Some of the behavioral things that you might notice are a withdrawal from friends and family. This goes along with that physical symptom of no longer being interested in things that the person was once interested in. It could be that there were people in this person's life that they really enjoyed being around, and now all of a sudden they've just kind of drawn into themselves and they're not wanting to be around people as much. This is not being introverted, this is a change. And when we talk about symptoms in children or symptoms in anyone really, it's important to notice changes. If this person has always been fairly introverted and they've seemed to be fairly okay with that and everything is going fine, then that's not a symptom of depression. But if the person all of a sudden decides that they don't want to hang out with people anymore, it could be that their brain is feeling overwhelmed, and so they withdraw from friends and family, because those friends and family, even though they can be fun, even though they can be great, if your brain is already under pressure, already under stress, already feeling like it can't handle what it's already having to do, then adding friends and family and different activities can be so difficult. Again, notice the changes. Try to look for changes in the people, in the person. And if this is new, then it could be a sign of something deeper. Difficulty concentrating. This happens for a few different reasons. I spoke very briefly about the chemical dopamine, and dopamine is basically the brain's reward chemical. If you're doing something you enjoy, you're receiving some dopamine. That enjoyment is from the dopamine. Now, concentration has a lot to do with that dopamine. If you are being rewarded by the thing you're focusing on, then your brain will want to keep focusing because the dopamine will keep firing. Well, with depression, you're not getting that dopamine rush. The brain isn't sending the dopamine, so it's not sending the reward for staying focused. If you're used to, when you're feeling focused, you're reading a story and you're really into it and you're so excited and you're getting all of that dopamine, you're going to want to keep reading the story. But when your brain is depressed, it's not sending as much dopamine. What will happen is you'll start to read, and then you can become quickly distracted by anything else that's going on because your brain is saying, man, I am not getting what I used to get from this. Let's look for it somewhere else. And it will seek out dopamine in other ways, in other places. That's where that difficulty concentrating can come from. In therapy, we ask people the question, in the past 2 weeks, have you noticed a change in your ability to focus while you're either reading or watching TV? And again, this is about a change. If the person has never enjoyed reading, then it's not a sign of depression that they don't enjoy reading. But if the person used to love reading and now it seems like they're having trouble focusing on their reading, then that could be a sign of something deeper. Same with watching TV. Some people just don't like to watch TV. Some people use television as a background noise. If it's that, then that's likely not a symptom of depression. But if they used to love watching TV, they used to always be on their shows, and now they're not doing that as much, it could be a sign of something deeper because their brain isn't able to focus as well because it's not getting that dopamine reward. It's not being rewarded for the good behavior of staying focused. So it can have some difficulties with that concentration. And difficulty sleeping, some of that restlessness. Again, if you haven't been moving around as much throughout the day, it could be that at nighttime you just have more energy. It could also be through spiraling thoughts that it's difficult to fall asleep. And then if your brain is feeling already depleted, then sometimes what can happen is your brain is seeking that dopamine rush at nighttime when it should be trying to go to bed because the brain is saying, well, we didn't get anything today, and it will keep you up. There are some of the symptoms, physical, emotional, and behavioral, of depression. Next, let's talk about where depression comes from. it's not that it's anyone's fault that someone is depressed, but there are some factors that can lead to depression or lead to more prevalent rate of depression, raise the likelihood of depression. One are the genetic factors. Depression is a biological diagnosis, a biological disorder. There we go. A biological disorder. So it can be passed from parent to child. If a parent has depression or has suffered from depression in the past, then it is likely that the child can carry some factors that will make it more likely for them to also have depression at some point. Children are more likely to develop depression if a family member has had it in the past. That's the basic way to explain some of those genetic factors. It's a lot of different things that kind of come together to make that happen. It's not as if there's one thing that it's passed down and now you have depression. But there is a terminology called biological predisposition. What that means is that the person is predisposed, they are more likely to have this disorder. In this case, it would be depression. So they're disposed, they are more likely to develop depression, but it's in there, but it needs something to trigger it. That's that biological predisposition. It's there, but it's dormant until something happens. That's where the stressful life events come in. Stressful life events are another cause of depression in young children, or another factor towards depression in young children. The way to understand this is that children who have experienced traumatic events or stress can develop depression as a result. If your brain was under a lot of stress before it was ready to handle that stress, it's almost as if the brain kind of blows a gasket where there was too much stress and now the brain just says, oh, I can't get going again. And that's where therapy can come in and really help alleviate some of that stress, some of that pressure on the brain. And then the final factors are some neurobiological changes in the brain. A way to understand that are some changes in chemical balance, that dopamine, serotonin, a few different chemicals in the brain that kind of all interact. If for any number of reasons those chemicals get off balance, then that can cause depression in children. A lot of times this can come from substance use, especially in adolescence. If there is an exploration of drinking alcohol or using marijuana, different substances, when a child is young, there's a reason why there are ages and limits on those things. Because when a child is very young, it can actually put the brain under more stress because the brain isn't quite formed yet. And so it can cause some of those changes in the chemical balance and then can result in depression in a child. Now that we've talked about what depression is, some of the signs and symptoms that you can look for, let's talk a little bit about the myths, some of the myths that I face often when I'm doing therapy with people who are either suffering from depression themselves or living with or helping a loved one who is dealing with depression. Myth number one is that depression is only temporary and resolves itself without treatment. This is the pull yourself up by your bootstraps myth. This is the big boys, big girls don't cry myth. This is one of those time heals all wounds myths. Depression is only temporary and resolves itself without treatment. The truth is that depression can be a very serious medical condition, mental health condition, and needs to be treated. This is why, again, it's important to understand that depression is more than sadness. Sadness is normal, depression is a problem. Sadness is only temporary. Feelings come and go all the time. And that's part of what therapy is for, is understanding that even those difficult times are going to pass. Depression, on the other hand, is an actual disorder And without treatment, it's very unlikely that that disorder will resolve itself. Myth number 2, children are too young to feel depressed. Now, let's talk about that feeling of depression versus the diagnosis of depression. Both would be false here. Children are not too young to feel depressed, and children are not too young to develop depression. Again, understand that that depression or that depressed feeling is about not feeling like you can do anything. It's just that feeling constantly, and it's about stress on the brain. It's about genetic factors. It's about chemicals. It's not necessarily only about stressful life events. On the other hand, there are children who are going through so many stressful things that are putting their brains under such stress, such pressure, that they are not yet developed enough to be able to withstand that. And so we are seeing rises in the cases of clinical depression in children because children are under so much stress and pressure that it's really causing their brains to kind of blow that gasket where it doesn't feel like they can take anymore. So children are not too young to feel depressed, and they are not too young to develop depression. Myth number 3, all depressed children act and feel the same ways. All depressed children act and feel the same ways. This is not true. Every child with depression experiences different symptoms. Some show that more lethargic, sad, not wanting to be involved in things kind of behaviors. Other children go to seemingly the opposite and seem to fight more often and argue more often, and it seems like they've got more energy. Depression can present itself in all kinds of different ways. So if you have dealt with depression yourself, don't assume that your child will experience depression the same way that you have. It could be a vastly different experience because it's much more about chemicals in the brain and how all those things are interacting. So no, not all children with depression act the same ways. And the final myth, myth number 4, is that parents can, quote, fix a child's depression on their own. We talked a little bit about this one with myth number 1, that depression is only temporary and resolves itself without treatment. The same is true in this case. Parents can do all sorts of things to support a child who is going with depression, but it's very unlikely that without some professional help at times, that parents are just going to be able to heal, quote unquote, heal the depression in their child. It's going to take more than that. Let's talk a little bit about some coping mechanisms and some different things that you can do if you are loving someone who is dealing with depression. First, it's important to look out for those signs and symptoms of depression, to be looking for the changes in weight, the changes in behaviors, either the increased aggression or a decrease in wanting to participate, a decrease in wanting to interact. Look for those things. That is really one of the best ways that you can support your child, is if you notice those things, is to then seek and get them some help for those things. So identifying those signs and symptoms, that's step 1, is to understand that what you're dealing with is depression. It's not just sadness. Sadness is normal. Depression is a problem. It's also important to have open communication with children, especially if you feel like they're going through depression. That open communication can be difficult, especially if the child is becoming more irritable and they're saying things like, I don't want to talk, different things like that. It's not about sitting down and interrogating your child, but it can be about having just an open conversation. Hey, I noticed that that Rosie isn't around as much. What happened with you two? And if it's, oh, Mom, I don't want to talk about it. We just had a fight. Okay, now you know that it's likely not depression. There's just something going on. But if they say, I just don't feel like being around people. Okay, now you know there might be something else going on. So, having that open communication to talk about the changes. Hey, I noticed you've been losing some weight. Maybe this is an adult and you're talking with them. Hey, I noticed you've been losing some weight. If the person says, oh my gosh, yeah, I just haven't been able to eat. Okay, you know, maybe this is something that there's something deeper. If they say, on the other hand, yeah, I'm going on vacation in a month or so, and I'm really wanting to look good in my swimsuit, then that's different. It's likely not depression. So having that open communication can answer a lot of questions. Then again, back to some of those myths, it's very unlikely that depression, not just a feeling of sadness, but depression, clinical depression, can just resolve itself without professional help, without professional treatment. That help can come in all sorts of different shapes and forms, but if you know that a child you love is dealing with depression, then do reach out to a professional and they can help coach you through the process of either therapy or different supports that can help support the child through depression and can get them out on the other side of that. There's all sorts of different types of therapy available for people who are dealing with depression. So it's a great thing to get people the help that they need when they're feeling this way, because that brain stress, that brain under pressure, is just not fun to be dealing with. If you know somebody who's dealing with it, then support them, love them, and do your best to uh, help them get some help and suggest that to them. I hope that today's discussion about depression has been helpful for you. I hope that you have enjoyed learning maybe some things that you didn't know before about this disorder, and I hope that through it all, you've been able to realize that depression is more than sadness. Sadness is normal. Depression is a problem.